I've been getting a lot of questions from viewers of my take on saturated fats. And since fats are such an important component of the diet, I thought we'd talk about that topic today. Now, first off, the government and organizations like the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association, and many nutrition experts recommend lean meats and low-fat dairy. And this is in order to achieve a diet that's low in saturated fat. Now, this supposedly helps prevent heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and cancer. The theory became mainstream when Ancel Keys published the 7-country study back in 1970. And this showed a correlation between heart disease and cholesterol levels compared to the consumption of animal fats. Now, this became the diet heart hypothesis, and it really swept the nation. Now, one of the criticisms of his study was Dr. Keys left out the data from 15 other countries that were also available to him. And when those were added in, the correlation was lost. So the question is, was Ancel Keys and all those organizations, their preaching of the low-fat gospel, is that right? Well, in my opinion, newer evidence doesn't seem to back up the diet heart hypothesis. Now, the giant $725 million Women's Health Initiative was a prospective dietary intervention study. And this study found no link between fat intake and cardiovascular disease risk. That was 20,000 women, and they were followed for an average of 8 years. And that's a major study. Now, a recent meta-analysis, which is a combination of many studies, was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2010. And it pulled all the trials with reliable data, and it concluded that there was no evidence for increased risk of coronary heart disease with increased saturated fats in the diet. Now, in the same journal in that same year, reported a study of over 58,000 Japanese people, which found that those with more saturated fats in their diet had 31% less strokes and 18% less cardiovascular disease. There's also evidence that saturated fats in the diet have beneficial effects on cardiovascular disease risk factors. Increased intake of saturated fats elevates your HDL cholesterol. That's the good cholesterol. It makes the LDL cholesterol particles larger. That's the bad cholesterol. And larger particles leads to lower heart disease risk. The LDL cholesterol particle size is a strong risk factor for coronary disease, and it's very easy to test. Yet, our doctors usually ignore this. Just tell your doctor you want to test your LDL cholesterol particle size. And by the way, test your Lp(a). Having an elevated Lp(a) cholesterol increases your risk of coronary disease 4 times. And that can be lowered by, guess what? Increasing saturated fats in your diet. Now, doctors don't test the Lp(a) levels either. I don't know why. They should. Now, saturated fat intake lowers the triglyceride levels. That's the fats in our blood. And it also lowers the insulin levels. And lowering both of these reduces our risk for heart disease and diabetes. Now, saturated fats also raise your body temperature. This is healthy. And many of my patients, I notice, have chronically low temperatures. And that ain't good. Our enzymes, which are really what make life happen, operate best at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. The immune system also functions better at a higher temperature. That's why we get a fever when we are fighting an infection. Now, raising the body temperature raises metabolism to help with weight loss or weight maintenance. Saturated fats also stimulate a gain in muscle mass, which is very important for optimal health. Now, science has given us all these clues, but we can also use our common sense to help us decide whether or not to eat saturated fats. Now, I realize we're all different, and there may be some people out there that don't need many saturated fats or possibly or even harmed by them. But think about this. Before heart disease epidemic struck our nation, the traditional diet was high in saturated fats, and the incidence of heart disease was very, very low. So it really couldn't have been the cause, at least not by itself. Now, humans have been consuming saturated fats for thousands of years. Saturated fats from both plants and animals are more stable than unsaturated fats. This means they're resistant to oxidation. Now, the more unstable polyunsaturated fats were traditionally consumed in their preserving packages, and that's seeds and plants. Now, our modern extraction of these oils and consuming them in mass quantities is likely quite toxic. Now, human breast milk, which is 54% fat, of which almost half is saturated. Now, that alone gives us a huge clue to how important and safe these fats are. Now, the fossil record tells us when humans killed animals for food, they cracked open the long bones and the skulls of their prey to get the high saturated fat containing bone marrow and brain. Now, I'm sure our ancestors didn't consume any egg white omelets in order to avoid the saturated fats. Now, if you eat a steak, which one tastes better? A dry one or a juicy one? Well, it's the fat in the meat that makes it juicy. Now, whole raw milk has a flavor and satisfaction that skim milk can never achieve. Now, what does margarine try to imitate as far as the taste? Well, you guessed it, it tries to imitate butter. So I get plenty of saturated fats in my diet. The sources are the tropical oils like palm and coconut. Butter is one of my favorites. It's best when it's organic and raw. Animal fats are also a good source of saturated fats. Again, these should be organic, as toxins are usually fat soluble and will be concentrated in the fat of an animal. Now, grass-fed animals will have less of the omega-6 fats, which we get too much of, than the grain-fed animals. Now, I always recommend being honest to yourself when you try a food. I know it's hard, though. It's hard to remove all the brainwashing that we've been getting. From the time I was a kid, I was told butter was bad. And for many years, I truly believed that I didn't like the taste of butter. But I'd really never even tried it. And boy, did I miss a lot of years of having to choke down dry bread and expose myself to the toxic trans fats that are in the margarines. And those tasted a lot like motor oil. Now, if a food tastes good and has no artificial flavor enhancers, then it's probably good for you. If you digest it well and feel good and you have good energy, that's another strong clue. Now, I encourage you to take a step today in the direction of a natural foods diet. This is Dr. G. Thanks so much for watching.